Hey everybody, welcome back to the Royal Palace Podcast. Today I am joined by Marlon. We're going to be talking about the latest political events in France, notably the vote of no confidence on Bayrou's government coming up the 8th of September. I've been away on vacation. I know Marlon from Flep24 has also been away a bit on vacation, but he's started back up and actually been paying attention to politics, unlike myself. And so I wanted to just start out by asking you, Marlon, what the hell is going on? We had a calm summer and we come back and it turns out the government's about to fall. So what's up?
Yeah, well, it was always about to fall. The budget vote was going to be coming up at the end of September, and that would have probably brought Bayrou down. He didn't go on vacation. He stayed at home. He stayed at Matignon, the Prime Minister's office, pulled up his sleeves. He podcasted a little, actually, on
Did he now?
YouTube. Apparently, yeah, he did actually. Apparently, the viewers and the listeners were very low. I haven't actually watched any of his podcasts.
Do you think he'd come on our podcast or yours?
I think he'd come on any podcast. I mean, any podcast would get better numbers than he got. Um, but he doesn't speak English, unfortunately. So,
Really?
well, not fluently to any degree. But yeah, so this was coming, and apparently, so he was going to stay at work, figure out how to get a budget that can get past the National Assembly, which, as longtime listeners of Flep24, the French legislative election podcast for 2024, 2025, and beyond, and the Royal Palace podcast know, it's a divided National Assembly, big national rally grouping, big grouping of La France Insoumise and other parties of the left, sort of divided into three blocks. And Bayrou has essentially been serving at the pleasure of the National Rally. There's been multiple no confidence votes against him, led by LFI. National Rally hasn't joined in yet, but this time they're probably going to join in because they're opposed to Bayrou's budget. That's the same thing that took down Michel Barnier last December, the last Prime Minister. It was the National Rally deciding to vote against Barnier's budget.
Right, now, for listeners, I think we mentioned this maybe on our coverage of kind of the political events of the last year, but in France, there's basically two major budgets. There's the state budget and the social security budget, or budget d'etat and budget de la sécurité sociale. And the thing about these budgets is one of them covers like normal functioning of the state, so like hiring everyone, national education, that kind of stuff. And so that's the state budget. And then there's the ones that cover the social benefits, and that's the social security system. So if we're talking about like universal health care, retirement, that kind of stuff, all of that comes from the social security budget, which is majority funded by cotizations. And cotizations are, some people would call them taxes, but they're not technically taxes. They're basically fees for service that you pay on your payslip, like when you have income, but also if you receive dividends, you pay a certain percentage of cotizations on them. So the state budget does not cover most social programs in France. Instead, it's mainly the functioning of the state, and that includes defense, of course.
Yeah, defense, like we were talking about earlier, teacher salaries, that type of stuff. But obviously, an important budget. Just won't touch those things.
So the way it's financed, the budget of the state is primarily through income taxes, corporate taxes, but even more by sales taxes. But we'll do a whole episode on the value-added tax, the VAT tax that France has. But it's not like a sales tax in the U.S. sense, because in the U.S. usually a sales tax is paid by anyone who purchases something, whereas a VAT tax is only paid in effect by the end consumer of a product. Now, this tax in France goes up to, what, 20?
I think it's 20.
Yeah, 20. I believe 20%. And so it's essentially a regressive tax that every French person pays when they buy a TV, go to the supermarket, purchase a car. And it's concerning that that's the main way the state budget is financed, because, again, it is so regressive. Because who buys things? Well, the poorest people. I mean, everyone, but, the poorest people buying their basic necessities.
Yeah, but obviously for poor people, the proportion of your income that is paid towards, they call it TVA here, is higher. Because if you're making $100,000 and if you pay $100 in TVA, that's a much lower percent than if you're making $1,000 a month and you pay $100, €100 worth of TVA. So yeah, but none of that is really in question. Like that system is going to continue going forward. That's not what the new budget is debating. But sort of what it is debating is whether or not France will continue to have a social model. And I guess whether or not is a grammatical faux pas because it's a whether. But the answer is no. It's just this continued destruction of the social model. One of the lighthouse measures of the budget is getting rid of 2 holidays. And what that really means is getting rid of 2 paid holidays, because in France, people can work on holidays, official holidays, but you got to pay them 100% more. So twice the amount that they would have got paid. So really it just means reducing people's pay while working more. If that goes through, though, now I think Bayrou, like the other day, yesterday, even said, "Oh, I'm open to not going forward with that measure." But even if they do or they don't, it's just a negotiation tactic because they're still going to cut or try to cut 44 billion euros in the budget. And so we sort of got away from it. But why is it happening now, the vote? Because there was going to be a vote on this budget at the end of September anyway. Bayrou basically knows that it's not going to happen. He's not going to survive a no confidence vote if it comes after the budget. And even though he said he was going to stay at home during the summer, pull up his sleeves and try to find some compromise, he obviously didn't try to do that at all. Even with the Socialist Party, who's begging to compromise with him and make a deal with him, François Hollande supposedly over the summer was grousing about the fact that Bayrou never set up a meeting with me. He never picked up a phone and called me. He's looking for no agreement. I forget her last name, Mary Louise something. She's the head of the CFDT, which is like the reformist union, but the biggest union in France. She sent a letter to Bayrou in mid-July looking for points of compromise. She didn't hear anything back. So Bayrou, whether he actually, he doesn't want to compromise is the reality. What he wants to do is sort of go out in a blaze of glory and then run for president in 2027. He knows that his budget's not going to be supported, but he wants to present himself as like the sober figure, the sober fiscal, leader who's willing to make the necessary sacrifices. And it's been a big theme of his whole political career. Bayrou's a guy who's run for president a few times, and during his presidential campaigns, he always focused on reducing the deficit. And now he thinks this is like a springboard for him for 2027. So he said, I'm not going to wait for the vote on the budget. I'm going to ask for basically a vote of confidence by presenting the program of the government before the National Assembly on September 8th. And if the National Assembly agrees with my program, we're going to go forward and do it, and we're going to save the country from runaway debt. Or if not, I'll come back in 2027 and you can elect me, and we can save the country.
Freudian slip there.
From runaway debt. But is there really runaway debt?
Right. So just to clarify for our listeners here, what Bayrou is doing is he's going around the normal process where the government would submit its proposition of a budget, people would debate it, people would make amendments, it would go through the normal democratic process. But instead what Bayrou has done, and this has unfortunately been a trend of the Macron presidency, is to say, look, I'm not open to debate on this budget. Instead, what I'm going to do is invoke Article 49 of the French Constitution, which in its first paragraph allows the Prime Minister to basically say, look, vote my budget. If not, my government falls. So basically packaging a vote of no confidence in the government with the proposed budget. And the reason you would do something like this is it's kind of a threat, right? It's like, do you really oppose the budget so much that you're willing to make my government fall? And this has been a common way that under the Macron presidency, various prime ministers have forced through unpopular reforms. I think notably of the change of retirement age, but it's not limited to just that. But then, yes, as Marlon is alluding to here, I guess there is a question as to like what is the problem with the current budget, because like if you look at just the Anglophone press on this, but also the French press on this question, everyone's talking about how there's tough decisions to make. Like, they kind of present themselves as accountants telling you, oh, well, there's just no getting around it. If we don't do something about all this debt that we have and the deficit, then we're going to be in trouble. So is that really true?
There was this big news story in the middle of August and I forget the exact numbers, but like France now to borrow has to pay 3.43%, which is higher than Greece is, borrowing rate. I don't know what you'd call that exactly, borrowing rate. And the implication, of course, is like, oh, France is on the verge of insolvency. It's even worse than Greece. The cost of debt for France, which is true. It is higher now. But if you think about it, like if you or I could borrow at 3.4%, we'd be doing really well, A 3.4% interest rate, if you bought a car and got a 3.4% interest rate, you'd be ecstatic. France can still borrow relatively cheaply, like any government in the world, or most governments in the world. It's not as if France will suddenly lose access to markets, or to borrowing markets. I don't know what you'd even call that, but credit. It would not lose access to credit.
Yeah, and unlike Greece, France is too big to fail, right? Like, no matter what the Commission and the ECB say on this point, it's just a fact, which is why Greece was famously thrown under the bus for their debt crisis, was that, basically a concession was made between France, Spain, and Italy, who are, considered by Brussels as bad students, quote unquote, in terms of managing their budgets, and basically we wouldn't, the EU would essentially allow these debt countries to survive at the expense of making an example out of Greece. And but the reason France especially was able to get away with this, because unlike Spain and Italy, it didn't have to make as many cuts to their social programs. Because of this agreement, or this de facto agreement, or rather what this shows is that France has political power because of the size of its economy and its importance in Brussels, to survive these kinds of things. So the idea that like France will somehow become the next Greece, I think, is very improbable.
And the other aspect of it is that just France could easily balance its deficit by raising, some small taxes on the wealthy. We're bringing back the tax on fortunes, for instance. There's this document tax, which apparently is one of those. It like covers more than, I think it's like 15 billion. So it's like 35% of the deficit alone, just from that one small tax. But the government has completely ruled out raising taxes.
Right, which is very odd, because contrary to popular belief, France is not actually. I mean, yes, it in terms of like the percentage of GDP, like of spending of GDP, yes, France spends a little bit more than Spain or whatever. But if we're talking about actual taxes that real people pay, it's actually pretty low. The income tax is relatively low. There's plenty of tax credits. There's a standard deduction, kind of like in the United States, that make it such that normal people actually pay very low income tax rates. So what's happening is people feel that they have a lot of taxes because a lot of their when they get their paycheck at the end of the month, or their payslip at the end of the month, they notice that a lot of the money has been taken out of it for cotizations. But again, that has nothing to do with this current budget. So the question is, why not raise taxes? And the reason is because the media always kind of makes, I think, a big deal out of the idea that like they kind of use the fear of cotizations on people's paychecks to make people think that if we raise taxes, it will necessarily be on them, which is plausible because whenever we do suggest raising taxes, it's usually the value-added tax, the TVA or the VAT tax, which, as we said earlier, is regressive. But it doesn't really seem to make sense to me why, for example, we can't raise the corporate tax, which up until recently, up until Trump, was lower than the United States, right? So for this supposedly high taxing nation, why would the corporate tax be lower than the United States? I don't know. What do you think about how this is being presented in terms of like raising taxes?
Yeah, well, part of it is like it goes back to how the deficit is sort of like artificial, not just in the fact that they won't raise, taxes, but in the fact that it wasn't supposed to be this high. Like, and there's this narrative that it sort of came out of nowhere, that Macron mismanaged the economy and suddenly the deficit exploded through a combination of, COVID spending and just general economic woes around the world. But the reason that there is such a deficit is because the growth projections were incorrect. Now you could say they just got it wrong. They made a little mistake year after year after year in assuming that there'd be more consumer spending because, like Patrick mentioned, TVA is a big component of the state budget. But it's sort of like it's like a double press. So there's the fact that TVA revenue is higher than ever for the record, but it's just not as high as were in their growth projections. TVA revenue is like at a historical high. Now you could say that's partially also just because of inflation too. Part of that, if prices are higher, TVA will be higher. But in 2017, it was 163 billion euros. In 2024, it was 217 billion euros. I don't think that's just inflation between those 7 years. France's debt payments are 50 billion euros a year, for instance. So that gap would cover it just in the growth of the sales tax income right there.
Right. And what slows down? I mean, like it's dumb economics 101, I guess. Like what slows down spending other than a tax on spending?
Right. 100%.
And so it's like if you really want people to consume, if that's France's problem, and it is to some extent, maybe don't charge 20% on every item. I mean,
well, it's not every item. Some are like 5.5%.
My monitor could be 20% bigger if it wasn't for the VAT tax.
I think electronics are probably 20%. Yeah, but also like food is like 5.5%. There's different levels for different types of products. But the other like side of that is, so the value added tax used to fund the state budget. There's also local budgets in France, like departmental budgets, municipal budgets, etc. And municipalities under Macron lost the power to basically lost most of their taxation power. They used to be able to tax, new house sales. They used to be able to tax, just general sales, but also there was just a housing tax every year. That's gone now. There was also a tax on businesses, which is gone. So these local governments are facing these huge budget shortfalls. Just it's mechanical. They have no taxation power. And now most of or a much more significant chunk of their funding is coming from VAT transfers from the state budget to the local governments. And then suddenly the state budget has a lot less VAT money, and so a deficit is produced.
Yeah, and technically they never, to be the annoying legal person here, technically they never had a power to tax, because it always comes from the National Assembly. But yes, there were so the habitation tax is a great example. So the habitation tax, everyone who's ever lived in France and doesn't kind of know how things works knows the horror of receiving a habitation tax, right? You rent an apartment, and then suddenly you get a very scary letter from the public finances saying you owe 1,000, 2,000 euros for a year of habitation tax. And one of Macron's sort of populist promises was he'll get rid of that. And anyone who has rented an apartment, again, is probably happy to see the habitation tax go. The problem is the habitation tax was also on people who owned their property. So you would pay taxe foncière, which is property tax, kind of like in the US, except it's super low. And then you would also pay a habitation tax on top of that. And so the idea that that he kind of does this, they kind of do this thing where they say, oh, we're going to do this kind of populist measure, but actually the tax break is, yes, it does happen to benefit renters, but it also happens to benefit people who own their property. And also in that same package, he got rid of the habitation tax on second properties, vacation homes, and that, sort of thing. So, there was a massive tax break by getting rid of the habitation tax. He also got rid of the audio-visual tax, I believe.
But to that point quickly, it's a savvy move, because now who's going to bring back the habitation tax, right? Because people see their bills reduced and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, exactly. And so the audio-visual tax that I mentioned is basically if you hooked your TV up to cable or whatever, or to fiber, and you the moment you connect it, it will charge you €150 tax to fund various operations, including public media in France, and Macron got rid of that. Which is why I never hooked up my TV to, despite the fact that like my service plan comes with like, all the channels or whatever. I never hooked it up because I didn't want to pay 150 euros or whatever. So I guess I can now hook it up.
He got rid of it. When did he get rid of it?
I think it was planned like a while back, but I think it was finally gotten rid of this year. But I would have to check. So have you ever gotten a habitation tax bill, or were you too late? When you came to France, it was too late?
Well, the first time I was here was like on a cash deal. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
But like some people get it like they hunt you down 2 years later and you get a 2,000 euro bill or whatever. Great. Also, something I do want to mention that's just like a fun fact is the habitation, like the deletion of the habitation tax happened over time, and it started by with income. So if you were like really rich, then you had to pay the full habitation tax in the first year of the deletion or suppression of it. But a lot of people didn't know that, and for some reason, I mean, this is only anecdotal, so I'm not making any accusations to Bercy, the public finances, but I know people who received bills that they because they're low income should not have received, and a lot of people ended up paying them, not realizing, because the deletion of this tax was very poorly explained, I think, to the public, and it was ridiculously complicated the way they were getting rid of it. That I know a lot of people who have who have paid this tax that was not actually applicable to them because of the suppression of the tax.
Interesting, yeah. And a lot of those taxes, the upshot is they would fund wherever the money comes from. It would fund the departmental budgets, and a lot of social services, are funded at that level. So now they're saying we have these budget shortfalls. We got to make cuts in social spending.
Right, and what's interesting is this didn't used to be the case. This is actually kind of a new thing. So there's been this weird, France has a weird history of decentralization and centralization, and in theory we are living in the era of decentralization, but as Marlon's saying here, with the getting rid of the habitation tax and everything, and putting emphasis on TVA as one of the main funders, you're actually centralizing power and making it such, because the TVA is flat across the country in terms of what level it is, unlike other taxes which might be modulated based on local conditions. And so ironically, we're kind of going through a period of centralization, but at the same time, the departments have gotten more responsibility, more reasons to have expenses. So one example of this is a lot of the roads that were called Route Nationale, national roads, which meant that the state was responsible for maintaining, have been passed to the department. And many accuse this transfer as essentially being a way of deflecting responsibility, because people accuse the state of essentially handing off road maintenance to the departments without giving enough financing then to the departments in order to maintain those roads. And then when the roads become, horrible and terrible condition, the national state gets to go, well, it's the department's poor management that has resulted in this situation. They've also passed more roads to communes, municipalities, whose budget is, again, fixed by the National Assembly because they can't raise resources on their own. A local municipality, like a commune in France, cannot just say, we have a 10% tax on, big sodas, for example, reference to New York here. That's not allowed. They don't have that taxing authority. So you give more responsibility to local divisions, but you don't give them the financing. I think, it's an accusation people make, and I think there's a certain truth to it.
And that reminds me of a story that was in the Canard Enchaîné a couple of weeks ago. I just pulled it up here. In 2025, the taxe foncière, is going to go up 1.7%. But it's like you said, it's complicated, so I can't even explain it. But it's different in different villages, like cities. Like, for instance, in according to also even the population in cities with over 100,000 inhabitants, the taxe foncière went up 3.5 to 4.5%. But in Nice and Saint Etienne, it went up 22%. Paris, over the past 5 years, it says it's gone up by 71%. Um, anyway, there's like another aspect to it, which is related to the budget battle, is that next year there are the 2026 municipal elections. And even though it's supposed to be, you know, raised yearly, apparently they're raising it less. No, it's going up 1.7% this year, with an eye towards the municipal elections next year, because they don't want to be seen as responsible for, these tax going up a ton. But then I think the implication they're making is that they'll raise it after the municipal elections. Now, I'm not even sure, according to this article, where that tax, who it's set by, but
Yeah, so the concept of a taxe foncière is set by the state.
okay,
And
so that's the state budget that's concerned.
yeah, it's kind of a mess because the original taxe foncière, the base points on which taxe foncière is calculated, historically is from like an old survey of value and like the property value, right? And so this has resulted in lots of places in like urbanized areas that now have people are buying houses for like €1 million, paying on an evaluation that's really old. Now, of course, the national government raises the
base,
the multiplier on the base, basically.
Yeah.
Right. So there's this base, and then they try to keep that up with inflation so that it's not going down every year. But the problem is, again, the values are going up. So the way it works is the municipality has to commission a new survey for and so that results in like taxe foncière being surprisingly low. Now, property tax is obviously much, much less regressive than TVA, but I do think, just philosophically speaking, there's a reason to question it. As opposed to just doing it on people's wealth or revenue, but ideally wealth, right?
Yeah, well, I see here too, it says, the municipal councils can actually decide to raise the taxe foncière above inflation. And according to a report from the Observatory of Taxe Foncière, it's gone up by 32.9% since
Yeah,
2013.
but that's encadré. So it's like this is the kind of fun thing. Basically, like, because the National Assembly, and this is true with other taxes, by the way, the National Assembly sets these kind of rules and then allows local authorities to modulate their taxe foncière, for example, above the national like multiplier percentage, whatever, right? But the problem with this is that they can't do too much per year, and the reason in theory, the national government does this is because they don't want they don't want a municipality to just suddenly pump up revenues.
Though that said, I think there's some law where like a municipal government can force a first offer of a property. Like you have to sell your property. You don't have to sell your property, but they reserve like the right to make the first offer, and you can't then take a second offer that would be like a lot higher. Now most of them don't exercise that power, and you don't have to sell it. You could just not sell your property, but like the difference between the market price of like 350,000 and then they're offering you 250,000, which one could argue you could use to build for social housing, but that's a whole other subject.
Also, it's a lot more complicated than Marlon's making it sound.
Am I simplifying it for populist sloganeering?
Yeah. Well, for one, the property, in order for this to be true, it has to be in a zone de préemption, and then. And you also have to like have a plan to do operations of a general interest. And if you pay under market rate, people can always go to the judicial tribunal to get the rate evaluated based on market. So,
okay.
I mean, I don't want to say definitively because I don't, this is a very complicated domain of the law. But my just knee-jerk reaction is if your property is not worth much, or you don't, you're like you're a humble guy who owns their home, you're not going to go sue the government over this. But if if you got the money and resources, maybe you will fight it. So I do think there's an inequity in that sense for sure.
For sure. Okay, we got to rethink housing plan if we win the municipal elections here. Thought we were just going to expropriate half the town. Uh, yeah, but that being said, the budget vote is coming up. It's just on the 8th, 5 days from when we're recording this right now. And I mean, he's going to go down. Like, the National Rally is going to vote against him. UDR, which is the RN-LR Alliance, is going to vote against him. LFI, of course, is going to vote against him. Right there, you have just about enough votes. The Socialist Party, I think, is going to, I mean, there's been individual deputies that have come out and said it. There's been some moves where they, might not, but they want the government to go down because the Socialist Party now is, saying, at your service, we're ready to be your next prime minister. So they think they can ring a deal for Macron, and they probably can. That's fine with them, but it would sort of be against the program they were elected on, no doubt, under the new Popular Front. So the Socialist Party is going to vote against him, and right there, it's done. He's gone. I talked with, I know I mentioned this on Flep, but I talked with a, former ministerial advisor, sort of close to Renaissance, and they were just saying he committed suicide, blah, blah, blah. The math isn't there. And they're doubtful that actually Macron will govern with the socialists. They think it's much more likely that Macron will either continue governing with the right, as he's done his entire presidency, more and more to the right, or dissolve Parliament. That being said, I don't think he'll dissolve Parliament. It doesn't make sense.
Why do you think he won't dissolve Parliament?
Well, first of all, his bloc is going to have even less deputies. Second of all, apparently he doesn't want to. That's the word, apparently he doesn't want to. I don't see what it gains him. I guess you could say the last time he didn't get him anything either. The other reason why not is because, of course, it'll delay the budget process, and then all the rating agencies are coming in soon. I think it's much more likely that this time he appoints a prime minister very quickly, because they want the business confidence. They don't want the debt rating to go down, because I think that's coming up soon. And apparently, I read Fitch's is already considering lowering it. I think he's going to be more concerned with stuff like that. And he could just keep getting defeated, I guess. If there is another election, probably the National Rally would make some gains. The left wouldn't be united, which I'm not saying has anything wrong with. He has any concern about that. I know Nicolas Sarkozy came out the other day and said that he supports the National Rally getting a majority. He called them within the Republican arc, and he's been bigging up Jordan Bardella for months now. He dined with him a couple of times. Apparently, he says that Bardella reminds him of himself, of just a young RPR member back in the day, which is probably true. I mean, it's probably not wrong, but sort of. This is going off on a tangent, but a big part of that is he wants to be pardoned, and he thinks that RN might pass a law that pardons both Le Pen and then by necessity him, because he wants his Legion of Honor back. He got stripped of his Legion of Honor after he got convicted. That's very important to him.
You would think that the RN would take this as a sign of kind of the crumbling of the center right, as opposed to wanting anything to do with this guy.
Yeah, but the reality is, a lot of them like Sarkozy, more or less. If you talk to people who support RN, they're I voted for Sarkozy, then I voted for Fillon, and now I'm here. Or maybe they've gone further to Eric Zemmour and Reconquête. I remember when, going to some rallies back in 2022, it was a really common trajectory. Sarkozy, Fillon, Zemmour, or Le Pen,
It's such a wild path to be because ideologically, these people do, you can question how real any of it is, but ideologically, these people in theory have very different alliances and different political projects. I can see someone moving to the right, but why you would want to embrace someone from the center right who, just like Macron, owes his allegiance to the business class and also to himself in terms of, all the reason he was prosecuted. So I don't know. I'll never understand this stuff, but
I guess the confusion comes from taking the National Rally's sort of anti-establishment position at face value,
Right, true. True, but I'm referring to the voters. You would think the voters would be soured on Sarkozy. It's like why is it not going like in the U.S. where the voters were like wanted nothing to do with Bush and Cheney on the right.
I don't know. I mean, they're fine with Bush and Cheney appointees on every level in the government, so
Right.
I think it just goes back to that, if you keep your eyes closed, you don't see what's happening. But yeah, so if there is a vote, if there is an election, that'd be great. That'd be great for Flep24, the French legislative election podcast for 2024 and 2025, though it might have to wait till 2026 or 2027. I don't think it'll happen, but I was doubtful about the dissolution last time.
Yeah, well, on the Royal Palace podcast, we like making predictions so that we can later claim how right we were or make fun of our guests for being wrong. So, what do you think? What do you think is going to be the outcome? You already said there's no dissolution of the National Assembly.
Yeah,
Bayrou's definitely out.
100%. I would be shocked. But no, he's out. It's not even like that. It's not even like that for him. He's not surviving this vote. He's gone. Yeah, I don't think the parliament will be dissolved. Who will be his next prime minister? Oh, I hope it's Xavier Bertrand. I have his number. All the names are circulating again. I bet it's Sebastian Lecornu. He's the defense minister. He's been there for like 7 years. He's like the longest loyalist for Macron. He was supposed to be prime minister last time, but the story is Bayrou, who like wanted his meeting with destiny and has always wanted to be president or prime minister, threatened to vote against the government with his 30 Modem deputies if he wasn't given the prime minister position. So I would say Lecornu. I think like the safe money last time was actually Lecornu. Bayrou was a little bit of a surprise. It was because at the last minute he had this meeting and said, this is what's going to happen. So Sebastian Lecornu will be the next prime minister of France.
And do you think it'll be the appointment will happen within a week or within a month, within 3 months?
Ooh, if we're making me predict, I did say it would be quick. Let's say 2 weeks.
Okay.
But that's not a very informed guess.
But if you're right, I mean, you'll be able to point back at this episode and just, claim that you're a political genius. So I have no idea. So for my part, I have no idea who it's going to be. I'm not tied in enough to make such a guess. I do think it'll be someone to the right. I think that's unquestionable.
And Lecornu comes from Les Républicains, so it's like the what,
Yeah.
The logical
conclusion. The suit and tie right,
Yeah.
And I definitely agree with you on that. And I also think it'll probably happen pretty quick. I'll give it a month. Maybe depending on how things go, Macron might try to drag it out a little bit, but I do not think we will be kind of in the long suspension, if you will, that we had last time. And I also agree he will not dissolve the National Assembly.
I'll say this in favor of...
Doesn't mean he won't eventually.
Right. I'll say this in favor of Lecornu as well. During the last, that long, suspenseful period, Lecornu was like dining with Marine Le Pen and everything. He's been sort of courting Le Pen and Bordella. And obviously, the next prime minister is going to have to be someone who can survive a no-confidence vote. And they need the National Rally to do so.
It's definitely sound logic, but my instinct doesn't even take that into account. I just say, like, the only thing that the right, and I consider Macron to be a part of that, the only thing the business class hates more than a fascist is a center leftist. And so I think that excludes any possibility of having even Hollande. I think Hollande is too left for this government. Even though Hollande, we could do a whole episode on him.
Yeah. Maybe we will. I don't know.
Because I think imagine you're Macron and you don't have another political election to do. Why would you not just force your choice on everybody? Even if the RN says no. I think this whole dance with the RN, like to keep a government stable, is also kind of it's political theater.
Oh yeah, I mean it lets the pressure of them determine we have to do this because the RN will vote us down if not.
Yeah, because really there's nothing stopping him from appointing effectively having a caretaker government forever.
Yeah, a technical government. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the only reason he's not doing that is because he wants to have the political theater of try to pretend the parliamentary democracy kind of bit. I think
that makes sense to me.
Well, thank you, Marlon, for coming on and talking to us about what's going on in France. I found it very informative. I hope our listeners did as well.
I
You want to
certainly
plug your
did.
show?
Yeah. I found it very informative. Thanks, Patrick. Yeah, anyone who wants to follow all the latest developments, we're only really posting Mondays these days, so we have some interviews coming up, so we might do some more during the week. Go to, I don't know, go check out go Google Flep24.
And subscribe to their Patreon.
Yes, it's the French legislative election podcast for 2024, 2025, and beyond. If you want to help us with our Canard Enchaîné subscription, we get a lot of our stories from there, and a lot of names of people to then go contact and find out things on our own. From there, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/flep24, and as Patrick mentioned, if you want to support the deep dives or anything else about the show, patreon.com/flep24. Thanks for having me, Patrick. This is the Royal Palace Podcast.
My pleasure. I'm looking forward to doing more with you guys in the future.
And go support their show. I don't know if you have anything actually
no,
to support
we don't have.
Well, just click
Patreon,
the
right?
links. Click the links.
We eventually want to do one. But the problem is I can't commit to I can't commit to pleasing the Patreon supporters quite yet.
Well, just recommend them to a friend and give them 5 stars on all the platforms. Then.
Yes, there you go. All right, cheers.
See ya.